Hey, we'd like to welcome everyone to the 47G podcast. My name is Aaron Starks. I'm the president and CEO of the Utah Aerospace and Defense Association, and I'm really happy to be joined here by Congresswoman Celeste Maloy. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
From time to time, we'll have candidates come in and talk about what's happening politically, what they're seeing in Washington, D.C., and importantly, how they're helping industry. And we share this with our viewers. We share this with all of our members. And so it's great to have you. You brought a lot of momentum into the state. I can't imagine how busy you've been. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm still excited to be where I am. This is something I never thought I would do, but now that I'm doing it, it feels really natural, as much as this can feel natural. I didn't realize it, but everything I've done in my life has been preparing me for this moment. And to answer your question, I am really busy. I don't get a lot of sleep. I don't take days off. But I think that's an important part of representing people. I think representing means you've got to show up, you've got to listen, you've got to be there on the ground with people. And that's how I spend a lot of my time. And I love it.
Well, you're doing a great job. I hear really good things coming from Southern Utah, and that is the district, right? Tell us about maybe the geography, the boundaries, and who you represent.
So I represent Utah's 2nd congressional district, and it's big. If you look at a map of Utah where they have the 4 districts colored, mine takes up most of the map. It's got to be almost half of the state geographically. I tell my cousins who live out of state, when they ask what's in my district, I always tell them Lagoon and St. George. And I think that helps paint a picture for people of how far I travel when I'm traveling my district. And then it's all the way over to Lake Powell.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Lagoon, so Farmington.
Yep, Farmington's the top end. I have half of Davis County, about a quarter of Salt Lake County.
Okay.
So that's where the lines are the most confusing.
East? Does it kind of go east when you get to Salt Lake?
Yeah, a little bit. And then it cuts way west. So I have all of Tooele County. I have part of Juab County, but the part that not very many people live in. And then from there down, I have all of Millard, Beaver, Iron, Washington, Kane, Garfield, Sevier, Paiute, Wayne.
So you've got to be a political athlete, meaning the needs and the opportunities in Davis County, Salt Lake County are going to be so different than Millard County.
To some extent, that's true. But I always say that the issues are the same. The details vary from place to place. Rural counties have their own unique needs, and I feel like I'm uniquely qualified to help with some of those things. I have a strong background in natural resources. And even in Salt Lake County, that really matters. It's not a public lands county like Paiute County is, but we have a big salty lake in our state, and it's one of the top priorities for most of the people I talk to in Salt Lake County. And my background in water and natural resources management is really helpful in addressing these issues. And in Davis County, again, it's not a public lands county. They're not as concerned about federal land management, but they're really concerned about national defense issues. And I worked for Chris Stewart for 4 years, and I have a pretty good background in, the work that he did in national defense and intelligence, and that's really important in Utah. And Utah needs a champion for national defense issues, which is one of the reasons we talk to each other. And I'm just going to say, you didn't ask this, but I'm going to jump in and say it because you're not going to ask it, and it needs to be said. The work you are doing at 47G to really concentrate aerospace and defense issues in Utah and make sure we have a climate and environment that fosters private investment and innovation in these things that are so important to national security is really impressive. And I don't think a lot of people understand what you're doing. Not all good ideas come from the government, even when it comes to national defense. In fact, most really good ideas come from outside of the government. And you're creating this space where good ideas can grow. And then, some of them join the DoD, some of them flourish on their own. But there's a synergy that happens when you have these industries here together and talking to each other and collaborating. And you're not a very old organization. What you've done in a short period of time is really impressive.
Well, that's kind of you to say. Thank you. And it happens because we have good partnerships, and the men and women who represent the state are willing to work together with us and partner with industry. And that's really the secret behind our economic success as a state, is we collaborate. Our lawmakers listen. We don't isolate and legislate in isolation, and there's always an open dialogue, and your team has been great. And so I appreciate that. You mentioned Davis County.
Yeah.
I want to drill down just on Davis County a little bit. Great partners to us, thriving economy. We work closely with their team because aerospace and defense is a core driver of their economic activity. Lots of small and mid-market companies developing technology you've never heard of,
And some technologies you can't talk about, right?
And some you can't talk about. Absolutely. Yeah. So you'd mentioned working with Chris. As you look at the national landscape, how do you think Utah fits into it? What can we continue doing that we're already doing? And what do we need to do better to ensure that we are a leader within national security, defense, intelligence, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what we're doing really well in Utah is being business friendly and being small business and innovation friendly. I mean, across the board, everyone knows about Silicon Slopes. Everyone has a cousin who has an at-home business, or, we're very entrepreneurial. But I don't know that everybody realizes how important that is in the aerospace and defense industry. I think before I got in policy, I probably thought most of that innovation came out of the military. I didn't realize most of that innovation came out of private businesses and then get adapted into the military. And so I think what we could do better in Utah, there's a couple of things, and one of them's on me. One of the things we could do better is toot our own horn. We're very innovative and entrepreneurial in Utah. We also tend to dislike talking about how well we're doing. And so I think we need to get the word out there that we're business friendly, we're aerospace and defense friendly, and keep attracting those minds and those dollars to this hub. And the other thing we need to do is we need people on the federal level who are on the right committees to make sure that we continue to foster that environment and that we have the resources we need. We have the air cover, so to speak, for the aerospace and defense industry here in Utah. And to that end, I said in my first campaign, I'm in my second one now, which is kind of hard to believe, but in my first campaign, I talked about, one of the committees I wanted to be on is the House Armed Services Committee, and they didn't have an opening when I got there 3 months ago. So I'm playing the long game, if it can be a 3-month long game, and still working on that. And I'm working with my colleagues in the Utah delegation just to make sure that we have a plan as far as committees go, to make sure that we're covering all the ground we need to cover. And Utah is unique that way. A lot of states don't collaborate and amongst their delegation and make sure that they're covering everything. Each member just looks out for what they want. But I'm having conversations with my colleagues about how we make sure we have the right committee coverage, and this is the top of the list.
Going back to what you just said made a lot of sense to me. The largest site employer in the state is Hill Air Force Base. 35,000 civilians, is that right?
That sounds about right. And we talk about Hill Air Force Base a lot. It's, I think, the second largest Air Force base in the nation. But we have kind of a constellation here. We have Hill Air Force Base. We also have the Utah Test and Training Range and the Twilla Depot. And there's a environment here of DoD installations, and Hill Air Force Base is the biggest.
If you were to take Hill Air Force Base out of northern Utah, it would take 15 years for that economy to recover.
Wow.
And that's what that's what I'm hearing from county commissioners and mayors. Like, the thesis is, if we're going to grow northern Utah, we've got to do it in partnership with the base. And, the corporate recruitment, the attraction that brings, the DoD investment, these are higher paying, more sustainable wages. But let's kind of go south a little bit.
Okay.
To me, Utah's a tale of two cities. There's kind of everything Weber County to Salt Lake. It's a metropolitan area. It's very concentrated, populated. But then, the state is slowly coming together as you approach more, as you get south of Nephi, and then you get toward Washington County, you're seeing just tremendous growth. What's happening in Washington County right now that's causing all this?
Well, people are discovering it is what's happening. And it's been happening for a long time. Washington County is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful, but it was a tough place to live before air conditioning.
Oh, I bet.
So since, the 70s, people have discovered Washington County, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And I think COVID sped some of that up. People needed to be able to get outside during COVID, and you couldn't in some states, and you could in Utah. So people started coming to national parks. And when you have freedom, it attracts people. And we love that about Utah. It comes with its own set of concerns. You trade one set of problems for another, and it's the kind of problems we want to have in Utah are house prices are high, our land prices are high, water prices are high because they're in high demand. And it's a great place to live, and we're a well-managed state. So people are going to keep moving here. And we also have a high reproduction rate. So people who live here are going to keep having families. And what's happening down there is that we're having to make some critical decisions about what growth is going to look like. We had a long time where we could just keep growing and not have to worry too much. We had to build new roads and widen some of them. But now we're getting to a critical point with water where we only have so much water. We're not making any more. And we're in the middle of a drought. And I think Washington County is doing a really good job. And I don't think they get enough credit for what they're doing with water reuse and conservation and making the water that we have go farther. The fact that that county has grown as much as it has in the last 30 years with the same amount of water they've had the whole time is pretty impressive. And they're leading right now. And some of the other Great Basin states or some of the other dry states beat us up a little bit that they're better at conservation than we are. And it's not true. We're just, again, not as good at tooting our own horns.
Yeah, it's not in our culture as much to be boastful.
Yeah.
Lands is like a core issue for the state of Utah. You would know far more about this than I would, but I heard a statistic recently that said 80% of our land is owned by the federal government. Is that true?
It kind of depends on how you do the math. It's probably more in the 65 to 75% range. Some of those stats count DOD installations and some of them don't. And that makes a big difference in a state like Utah where you have a lot of land that's part of bases. And then there's some overlap, like the Utah Test and Training Range is also in the West Desert where it's all public land. But yeah, it's a majority. The majority of our land in Utah is managed by the federal government. And when you talk to most people about the federal government, they picture Congress and Washington, D.C. and the president. When you talk to people in states like Utah about the federal government, they picture guys in white trucks, out driving around and managing resources. And that's a big difference in what our state needs and the obstacles and the challenges that we face and have to overcome. That was a lot of my appeal, I think, in my first campaign, is that my background is in public lands and we have land issues. Our local governments are dealing with federal processes whenever they're doing the basic things that local governments have to do, like building roads and pipelines and power lines.
Yeah. Is it a problem in and of itself to have that much of our land owned by the federal government?
It is. And I think every politician in Utah agrees with that idea that it is a problem. The difficulty is solving that problem because it's been this way for so long. It's like a lot of the other problems we're facing politically. The solution's going to cause some pain. It's going to upset the status quo, and we haven't quite found the right set of circumstances to make that happen yet. It's like solving the national debt. We're not going to solve the national debt until we stop spending as much money as we're spending. But it turns out when you're spending money, somebody's getting it, and taking that money away is going to be tough. And we're going to have a high pain tolerance to be able to solve the problem. And we haven't been there, but I think we're getting there.
That's a great segue. National debt. I'm concerned about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
you should be.
I continue to hear that we're spending more on the interest to finance the debt than the interest paid alone exceeds what we pay to fund our military.
Yeah. And that's not sustainable. And there are some obvious answers to that and some less obvious answers. We obviously need to spend less than we're taking in, and we're not doing that. That's the solution that everybody can see. But even some of the things we were just talking about are more tied to this than you might notice at first glance. When we're energy independent, then inflation isn't as bad. When fuel costs are low, the cost of everything else is low. Fuel costs are high. We're not energy independent right now. We used to be, and the reason we're not is because of federal policies that came out of the administration, and a lot of them have to do with land. So the first day of the Biden administration, he decided that we weren't going to explore for oil and gas or minerals on public land, and that impacts the inflation we're seeing. But you have to kind of follow the trail to see the impact that had. And so even things like our land policy can be used to address our national debt, and in ways that are really easy to implement and make a lot of sense, but we have to do it.
I think everyone in DC would say we need to spend less. But what does that in theory look like? What are we going to quit spending on?
That's where the problem comes in. So the thing that I think should be our first step is just our executive branch is too big. It's too powerful. It's doing too much. It's regulating almost every aspect of our lives. I think the easy first step is to look at what agencies are authorized to do by law and defund anything they're doing that's outside of that. That wouldn't solve our national debt, but it would solve some of our systemic problems, and it would go a long way towards addressing the national debt. Then we're going to have to deal with some things that are tougher, things like the entitlement programs, the mandatory spending. And a lot of times when I have this conversation with people and I say we have to attack the mandatory spending, they immediately go to the military. The bad news with using the military as our first place to cut is that we're falling behind China and we have to keep up with their technology, or we live in a really dangerous world right now. There's a war going on in Ukraine. There's a war going on in Israel. China's eyeing Taiwan. Geopolitically, we're in a really tricky place. And so we can't underfund our military. But what we can do is make sure that we're spending the money in the most effective way. I mean, we need to apply some of the same treatment to military spending that we're applying to water policy in Washington County. We need to make every dollar do as much work as it can to keep us secure and make sure we have peace on the world stage through strength in the United States.
You've done a great job campaigning.
Thank you.
You've put a great team together.
I have.
What is next from a campaign perspective? You have convention, which is in April?
Yes. And I am going the convention route again. I'm not gathering signatures for a lot of reasons. One, I actually do believe in the delegates and the process of vetting. And two, I'm getting checks from people who don't have a lot of money to throw around. I'm not going to spend their money on signatures. So I'm out campaigning. I'm hitting the road and making sure people are seeing me and hearing from me because I'm betting it all on the delegates.
Really like that. We are unique. We have this caucus convention system, and March 5th is caucus night here in Utah. We have grown so much as a state that all of the net migration here requires us to be more inclusive and to do a lot more outreach, marketing, promotion to these new residents to help them understand what an extraordinary process and system it is. I think that's where we're falling short.
I agree. And I think the barrier to getting involved in the caucus system for a lot of people is uncertainty. So we've recorded some commercials about caucuses. I'm doing a college road trip in a couple of days to go on campuses and talk to young people about caucuses. We've tried to really promote how the system works in Utah because it is unique, and we have a lot of people who are new to the state. We have a lot of young people who are new to politics, and I've had a lot of them say they don't want to go to their caucuses and get yelled at by people who are their parents or their grandparents' age. So we're trying to make sure people know what to expect because I think they're more likely to walk in the door if they feel like they understand what's coming. And I'm going to put in a shameless plug here. Go to precinctportal.org to find out where your precinct is meeting so that you can get involved in your caucuses.
It is important. It is important. And I love the idea of neighborhoods coming together and electing representation to then go and cast their votes. Like, it's actually a beautiful process and system. It does need to be a little bit revitalized. It needs to be marketed properly because it has the potential to keep Utah at the forefront of the nation in a lot of areas.
Yeah. And the thing that I always tell people I love about the caucus system is that somebody like me has to go and campaign to every neighborhood in my district because there's a delegate from every neighborhood. If it weren't for that, I could campaign in Davis and Washington counties and ignore the rest of the district. But if I have to go stand on a stage at a state convention and talk to delegates, then I've got to actually get out and campaign to the whole district. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
So what are you telling voters? Why Celeste Maloy?
It's a good question, and I have an answer to it. I campaigned last time, 5 months ago, on, we're hiring somebody to come in the middle of a Congress and pick up the reins and keep going. And I'm uniquely qualified to do that because I've been working in this district and for this district my entire adult life. And I worked for Chris Stewart. I knew the priorities that the constituents from this district were coming in and asking for help with. And I can pick up the ball and just run with those. Now I've mixed my metaphor. I don't know if you use balls and reins at the same time. But now I'm in a really similar situation. In November when we vote, I'll be 1 year in. And And I said I was already partway up that learning curve. I'm going to be really far up that learning curve in November. And what we don't need is to start over. And we definitely don't need to start over with somebody who doesn't have the background and the experience in this district. And I don't want people to think that I'm saying vote for me just because I'm already here. I'm already here and I'm out. I'm talking to people. I'm meeting with people. I'm responding to the needs that our local governments and our constituents have. And I'm trying to be as responsive as possible and as transparent as possible. I go on the radio regularly. I do things like this podcast. I talk to news stations every time I get a chance because I know I have a responsibility to come back here and tell people in the 2nd District what I'm doing to represent them and how I'm representing them. Every time I take a tough vote, I do a press release and I reach out to the media and say, I want to come on and talk about it. Because even when people disagree with me, they have the right to know why I voted the way I voted. And I'm trying to be really upfront and really transparent about that because I think that's what good representation requires. So they should vote for me because I'm doing a good job and I'm up already most of the way up that learning curve, and they don't want to start over again with somebody who's not and may not do a good job.
Continuity is important.
It is.
Especially within the House.
Yeah.
So, well, you're doing a great job representing the state. Thank you for prioritizing this industry, joining us today, and thank you to your wonderful team. We look forward to working with them.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing. Please keep doing this for the state of Utah.
Thank you.